The others' opinion will be not taken into account. So this is done when voters are counted, and during referendums it is done the same. But this was not a referendum. So there were auxiliary questions. They appeared suddenly, and it was worth that they would not have a legal force. This is not a referendum. It means that the majority, many people who had opinion on this, their opinion was not taken into account. And taking into account the situation with pandemic, people didn't want to endanger themselves. So this was not a referendum, even at the stage of planning. So no use, absolutely. I didn't check the quality of work of those who carried out the survey. And no one rejected the situation. They didn't select people. They didn't ask who wants to. They answered as many times as they liked. So in this case, we do not have any information about what these answers represent. We may say that this is nothing. Quality and results of the survey, they are not valuable. These are just some assumptions provided by some politicians that some issues are supported. So we could save a lot of time and money, huge money actually, and to provide them for fighting COVID, to support hospitals and Ukrainian doctors instead of holding such surveys. And not volunteers worked there. The work of those people was paid. And what is your opinion on this? And also in your publications, you've said that the survey is not representative because it covers only mainly the proponents of one pro-power party. It turned out that not everyone understands the difference between a representative survey and a referendum. On Facebook, they discussed this about those volunteers who participated in the survey. Sometimes it happens also during referendum, but there is a difference. I fully agree with what Andrei said. Important difference is that during referendum, people beforehand know that this data will have legal consequences. And here they said that there won't be any legal consequences. And also in referendum, they do it during some time. In different countries, it takes different time, half a year minimum, or several months. In order to have discussions, everyone should be able to express their opinion or to carry out campaigns for some views. And if it is a referendum, people would come. And in this case, this is not a referendum, this is just a survey. So people could stay at home. So this is not representative data on the whole for the population. For this, we should carry out a comprehensive survey. If we compare it with elections in 2019, three rounds of elections, error is several percent, up to 5%, 3% for the first round of elections. So this is not representative for those who came to polling stations. The main reason is that it was perceived as party survey. As a rule, sociological companies, they try those neutral companies. Even if some companies are affiliated with some party, there are doubts in their data, they are criticized, their data is scrutinized. All professional companies, I believe they work normally despite customers who ordered the survey. But there may be some questions about neutrality of their data. And in this case, it was initiated by the president, his party. That's why this survey about intent, it looks like the representatives of servant of people, they were proportionally 2 times more than among the population on the whole. And the European Solidarity, they had much less. A rating company also carried out a survey, and they have shown real figures. This correlation was even more contrast. The European Solidarity 3 times less, 3 times less, and the People's Servant of the People Party twice more. So proportionally, it was much lower. So the error would be about 20% or 30%. It even hard to say. And in exit poll, the error is about 2%. And if error is 20 or 30%, this is not. We cannot use this data. This data is not useful, and we cannot tell whether they are representative for some parts. So, for example, I believe that there is no big sense in this, because everything else increases this error so much. So these details, they do not influence much. During exit polls, we are trying to survey all the people, and each rejection is a threat that people did it not because of coincidence, not because of the sentiments, but because of some of the characteristics, and they increase the error. In many polling stations, people were not trying to cover all people, and that's why these volunteers, regular volunteers, they become desperate volunteers. Those people who are really interested in this survey. This influence of party affiliation, it increased drastically.
Let us try to qualify and understand what it was. It was neither exit poll nor referendum. Perhaps it was a survey, a questionnaire. But we even cannot call this a systemic survey. This was a questionnaire asked to some specific people randomly willing to answer. Perhaps it was just the opinion collecting or information public awareness campaign. In my opinion, it could be done cheaper and having looking at the number of polling stations near which that so to say survey was held, I do not think that this is a representative, even informational campaign. I believe that any professional survey commissioned from any professional organization might be done 10 times cheaper, and addition from the interlocutor 100 times cheaper. So this was about the representation of the sample, and now about the answers and the questions. It seems to me that the questions were a bit intricately formulated, and in my opinion, some percentage of answers had been lost. In some questions, it is possible to answer yes or no, but here we face the ideas of people, how they understand each question. When we mean any free economic zone somewhere in Donbas region, of course, average Ukrainian citizen may either support or non-support to such an abstract idea. But if we try to imagine any consequences for the decision making at the governmental or presidential level, then there's answers yes or no are not informative enough to support drafting of any legislation on that topics. The difference made by the referendum allows to discuss which territory we mean exactly. What does the free economic zone at this specific territory actually mean? What does it mean free? What does it mean economic? And what does it mean zone in specific context? And when there is a referendum on such a question, for example, then everybody going to the referendum is aware what is meant under the specific economic zone. The same is true about each question in that survey. I suspect that many people, maybe half of the respondents, may not even know what is cannabis, and that perhaps many people do not know that this is the concentrated compound, chemical compound of the plants and which are grown in Ukraine, and the same is true about the question about life sentences for the biggest corruptioneers. And I'm sure that sociological organizations like Razumkov Center, KMIS, etc., they definitely know that people in vast majority stand for the punishment for corruptioneers, but I'm not sure about life sentence, and I'm not sure about the order of putting these questions. Maybe it intentionally was put the first in the list of questions, and like with any survey, the answers of respondents should answer specifically the question which was posed. In this very specific situation, we see that an attempt to develop grounds for further actions of politicians or potential actions for the actions of politicians. We clearly see that many people, absolute majority maybe of respondents, were unable to understand the questions and the consequences. And when it comes to any public opinion that has to back up the decision making at the governmental level, then we should follow specific procedures. Some people believe that this opens a possibility for the manipulations. How do you comment? How would you comment on them? I have no negative comments as to the questions themselves, but the difference is that these are questions. How they are formulated, they are not, they should not be addressed to general public. They should be addressed to experts, particularly in those issues. And I also disagree with the fact that the party symbols, party logo was used for that. The answers as to the free economic zone, we did not code the answers because we had no clear understanding what the authors had meant under free economic zone. Nevertheless, the two-thirds of respondents also haven't understood the question, and they try to answer following just words. Free is good for people to be free. Economy should be, etc. And if we try to move to Europe, towards Europe, there are some values, there are moral norms that we should respect. If we would ask people whether corruptioners should be hanged in the streets, we also might get a big number of positive answers even to these terrible questions. So this only illustrates my idea that the same questions, they could exist in that language, but they had to be asked to the experts. And now let's discuss the threats coming from similar initiatives which might be taken by people in power in the future. What are the lessons which we could learn from this precedent, and what negative consequences we might have? In my opinion, one of the possible consequences might be as follows. The competence to make decision in any of the issues falls within the powers of the current people in power, either the president or the majority in the parliament, and they may pass any piece of legislation they want. So the consequence which might expect is as follows: any question which is inadequately perceived either by people or by president, MPs, etc., might raise disputes in the society, and I have a bit of concern that if we tolerate and agree the results of this, so to say, survey, in the future we may see the similar surveys posing even less popular questions to people. For example, you may the authorities may initiate a survey about pre-border territories. Actually, there is a threat that the democratic procedures might be substituted with this pseudo survey, and actually anything could be done in the future. It's like a black box. You never know what is inside. You cannot see what's inside in the black box. You can check that, and in the future that black box may contain any questions the power wishes. If this becomes a precedent, but not just a mobilization action for the electorate, then if this becomes a precedent, this might become a real threat. May we expect for the legislative initiatives based on that survey, all the project supporters, project organizers, as of now, should understand that the project failed. It was neither a sociological survey, it was neither a public opinion poll, nor it was a referendum, and we only may hope that perhaps this will not be used to back up the position of the president. But if the president is interested in promoting any of those items which were brought to the attention of respondents, then he should take responsibility upon himself. I do not see any threats with this survey because it does not worsen the situation against the situation with the referendum. Almost each year I keep writing an article about imperfections of our law on referendum, and which discusses in much detail how the ballots should be casted and how they should be delivered to the counting points, etc. But there is no instructions in our law how the questions should be asked. While formulating the question, you may predict the answers to it. So in this new law on referendum, just like it was with two previous laws, the power can manipulate with public opinion. The president once mentioned that about Budapest memorandum. The question doubtfully will be recognized by the international experts, and this is bad. I have heard even such an opinion that all the surveys, all the exit polls after elections should be banned because this is a sort of manipulation, and I am a bit concerned that if this is accepted and introduced into practice, then we might turn into Russia or Belarus. Where surveys are entrusted to only those organizations who have the reputation that they are able to provide the best result for the power. Well, in this case, may we imagine that in future the direct democracy could be implemented via smartphone button, smartphone key, and that this might become the uncontrolled, totally uncontrolled process, whether there should be fears that such thing may happen in result of that survey. We should keep in mind that that big part of Ukrainian population doesn't have access to internet either through mobile connection, smartphone connection, or via internet services. While in 2014 there were much discussions about a transit server where the results of elections could be distorted, and I think that the same concerns persist today, when you cannot guarantee that the server which has to collect the results of digital voting is totally protected from distortions. In these circumstances, you cannot rely on digital voting. I believe that digitalization is a good thing, and it may be very beneficial for the government, for the population, but it's too early to substitute offline elections in Ukraine with online elections. I like the idea of digitalization. I like the idea that the state in a smartphone is a good idea, but the issue is how this will deal with public opinion and public awareness. If this is about surveys of broad masses, population, which have neither smartphones nor internet, and keep this in mind. This is one thing. If that service would be organized based on the idea that all people have smartphones and computers with internet, then this is quite different thing. And the biggest danger is in the fact that many people do not understand some things, and they are not ready to recognize this publicly, and it's easier to them to say just yes, answering the question which they do not answer. A good example is the old Kuchma's referendum about the two-chamber parliament, when people just answered yes, not knowing what does it mean. So this illustrates that much depends on the organizational aspects of survey or referendum. Okay, if the government wishes to know public opinion, how they should do it, whether they should take this information from opinion polls or they should do something else. If the authorities wishes just to find out what the opinion is, then an ordinary research done by the experts is enough. Usually this is or this could be a public opinion poll survey carried out by experts, and this will be very informative and reflect the actual situation. If the government wishes to take into account, or better to say, the government wishes the people to make decision like it happens with the referendum, then formulation of the question for referendum is critical, and it is absolutely needed to clarify and explain to people what actually is meant. And you should guarantee that people are not forced or pushed to answer in a specific way. For example, we may recollect the referendum of 2004, when there were so long questions that people were unable to understand what it was about. To know the public opinion, it is sufficient to commission a survey from one sociological company, and what you can do, you may commission such a surveys on the same topic from several sociological centers, and and appoint an arbitrator between them, so to say, a democratic initiative as a center. For example, the exit poll results done by well-established sociological centers are trusted even more than the election results counted by the Central Election Committee. If the decision splits 50-50 between the respondents, but and in this case you may go forward with the referendum, but in my opinion it is useless. I recollect the idea of Poroshenko and Zelensky about NATO membership and how this was postponed. In my opinion, in this situation, it is useless to have referendum. It will more split the society than unite it. Thank you, gentlemen. I now and then check my smartphone to follow up the questions to you in our social networks. So the first question from our spectators. Now each political force in each region may announce such a survey to promote their political ideas. Whether you believe that this threat may arise?
If this is political force, let's say so, we had such a situation, maybe not connected with some ideas, but during elections, often we face a situation when allegedly sociological organizations, even if they are registered, they do not carry any activity. Even bad survey is costly. Why would they spend this money? There was a popular among Ukrainian political forces such a thing to publish fake ratings to promote their party or their candidate. It works a little bit different, but no one knows. So methodologies are similar. Ukrainian political forces, unfortunately, used often, they have some sort of a tradition in this. If there is a threat, there is a threat of the use of technologies by state bodies. And if we are speaking about parties, yes, they may use this unfair sociology, and this technology has been used for a long time. In this case, we were speaking about such initiatives as Ukrainian Choice, maybe, or other surveys and pseudo-referendums about joining of Oblast of Ukraine to some other countries, maybe initiatives like this. There is such a threat, I say, but there is a threat if local bodies of power, if they are interested in such methods about political forces, for example, Ukrainian Choice, they use different methods until 2014. Vladimir, would you comment on this? So we have this. People print such data without carrying out surveys. Palchevsky data, it differs among the sociological companies 20 or 30%, and it is impossible if you carry out real survey. So they use such a technology. I believe that the criticism for this exit poll that this will show that this data does not provide a lot, but we hope for positive influence. About awareness of people and about disillusionment among people after they were confused in such a way. One more comment. The president didn't want to ask something, he wanted to say something by this survey. So this is a philosophic argument. Maybe you will comment on this. And I ask journalists who are here in the hall to ask questions. If you have questions, please raise your hands and introduce yourself. So about this argument, what can you say? It is difficult for me to say what this person wanted to say. It is really probable that there is a mobilization effect on the electorate. So this is like information campaign. Maybe he implements his pre-election promises. This comment is right. Maybe he wanted to do this, and at the same time he wanted to ask people who have experience, who know something about sociology, studied it in universities. Maybe they do not understand the purpose of this research. Maybe he honestly didn't understand the drawbacks of this organization of survey. And I'm surprised that no sociologists were invited to the survey. And do you have questions? There are no questions. Thank you for being with us, for finding time. I believe that your agenda is really tough now because of events that are going on. And it is of value that you joined us and explained such important things to people, to our viewers. And materials will be provided to broad circles of people. UCMC always joins such initiatives. We may say that this is educational campaign. So we end press briefing. Thank you for being with us here and online. Once again, I would like to thank our speakers for being with us today. Thank you. Have a nice day. Have a nice day.
Доброго дня, шановні пані та панове.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our online briefing in the UCMC, and we now discuss preliminary observations of the UWC and UCCA international monitoring missions. I am pleased to give the floor to Mr. Sergei Kosenchuk, representative of the observation mission in Ukraine. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for joining to our today's briefing, and we are happy to introduce the results of the observation and the monitoring missions of the Ukrainian World Congress and the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. The UWC is a joint organization of the Ukrainians in diaspora. It represents more than 120 million Ukrainians in the world, and it has official status in the UN and in European organizations. One of its top priorities is to support fair democratic elections in Ukraine, and the monitoring missions organized by UWC is not an ad hoc event, but this is a systemic work, and from 1995 it has been present in all the elections in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian World Congress participates in all the observes all the elections in Ukraine since 1991. This year, our monitoring mission was not easy. It required a new approach and even new philosophy. Even the chairperson of the Central Election Commission mentioned that elections this year elections had been expected to be one of the most complicated in Ukraine, and partially because of the amended legislation, partially because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and partially due to the great attention and great interest in local elections due to decentralization reform, and the situation was warmed up by the situation that many people became disillusioned and felt the change in their opinions during the last years. That's why during the next hour, during this briefing, we will present the findings of the monitoring missions. And today I have my colleagues, Mr. Boris Brzezhnevsky, head of the international mission of the Ukrainian World Congress, Mr. Andrei Futey, chairperson of the international mission of the Ukrainians UCCA, and Ms. Natalia Nemilevska, chief monitor of the UWC, and Mr. Rina Domenica, and who's chief monitor of the UCCA in here in these elections in Ukraine. So today you will hear the preliminary findings of our observers, of our monitors, and my kind request to the journalists. In case of any questions either to people here in this room or to our colleagues in Zoom online, you may either ask personally here in this room or to ask your questions in Zoom chat of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center or via social networks of the Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. With this, I would like to introduce our first speaker, Mr. Boris Zhizhnevsky, chairperson of the international mission of the Ukrainian World Congress in monitoring elections. I think that Mr. Zhizhnevsky and actually his family devoted almost all their lives to the service to Ukrainian people, especially when it comes to elections. Mr. Zhizhnevsky has a huge experience as a monitor in international elections in many countries, and he speaks Ukrainian. He knows the specificities of Ukraine quite well, and we are very grateful that in this situation, international situation, Mr. Zhizhnevsky agreed to take this role upon him. Mr. Zhizhnevsky, the floor is yours. Thank you, Sergei. Dear journalists, happy to welcome you this at press conference, joint press conference of the UWC and UCCA devoted to the monitoring at elections on October 25th in Ukraine. Since 1991, both our bodies has been participating in monitoring of elections in Ukraine, but we are different from other international monitoring missions. The first thing and the first difference is that we not only understand Ukraine and speak Ukrainian language, but we deeply understand Ukrainian history, and we are familiar with Ukrainian political history, and we are very much different from other international monitoring missions in the fact that we are deeply interested in Ukrainian fate. We feel ourselves deeply connected with Ukrainian people. We were among those who demonstrated and organized political rallies during the Orange Revolution and the revolutions of dignity. And now the situation everywhere in the world has changed. The entire democratic world had understood that the democratic values are under threat everywhere in the world, and the front line of fighting for these values is here, is in Ukraine. Now I would like to comment on our observations of the process before elections, on the election day, and after elections. First, I would like to mention the external factors, external observation. The first external factor is a geopolitical situation of Ukraine, so to say. There is a neighboring Russia which is very close to Ukraine, and in Russia they have now the Putin's autocratic regime. Putin keeps saying that the post-imperial situation, that Russia had taken the post-imperial position, and and he is leading pro-imperialistic policy as to Ukraine and Donbas region. This new Russian autocracy believes that Ukraine, where each citizen has the right to vote and express the will, is a direct threat to Russian Federation, and this is Russia who has to be blamed in the fact that many citizens in Donbas region and in occupied Crimea are deprived from their right to vote in Ukrainian elections. This was the first sector, and the second issue, external issue, is that for the first time, the Hungary has stand up, and for the first time, they tried to get an impact on the voting in Ukraine, especially in Transcarpathia. It is unacceptable that the Prime Minister, that people from Hungary participate in the elections, and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary, Peter Szijjártó, encouraged the voters in Transcarpathia to vote for a definite pro-Hungarian party. It's also unacceptable. And the international assessment and evaluation of the latest elections in Hungary suggest that those elections in Hungary were not considered as democratic. And the third external factor which we have to consider is the global pandemic. These elections, latest elections in Ukraine, happened in conditions of the second wave of pandemic everywhere in the world and here in Ukraine. Now about internal factors. Internal factors, I mean legislation, new electoral legislation, and first of all, the IDPs for the first time were given the suffrage, and the legislation, newly passed legislation, had taken into account the fact that there are a lot of IDPs in Ukraine now. Then this new legislation had simplified an access to elections for the people with disabilities. And now when the new legislation is in force, we have to work harder to implement it. Nation in the Central Election Commissions was very much improved. But now I will speak more about the negative features. The first is that the amendments, positive amendments to the electoral legislation were introduced too late. The second is that almost 500,000 of people in Donbas regions in those communities which are close to the contact line, they were deprived from voting. Our mission is different from many foreign missions here in Ukraine because we had an opportunity to meet with the Parliament of Ukraine, specifically with the committee which deals with local self-governance. And we are the only monitoring mission which not only observes the elections, but also, unfortunately, the sound was interrupted, and we submitted a letter to the Parliament Speaker, to Mr. Razumkov, and suggested in that letter we requested to invite representatives of the civil administrations in pre-border regions to the parliamentary committee and to explain why they had made that decision to deprive 500,000 people from participation in voting. Russia had deprived people in big parts of Ukraine from voting. I mean the territories which are non-controlled, and then Hungary interfered into the elections, and the local communities were deprived from voting. In conclusion, I would mention that international monitors reported minor violations in the polling stations on the election day, which were unable to influence the overall result of elections. We believe that the process, the election process, campaign, and the voting on the election day in general, they comply with the international standards on fair and democratic elections. Thank you for your attention. Thank you. I hope that our audience will pose questions a bit later. And now I would like to invite to the microphone head of the monitoring mission of UCCA. And I know that currently you are in the active phase of preparation to the American elections, and you are very busy with that task. But nevertheless, you found some time to follow the elections in Ukraine. And Andriy, would you present your work here?
Thank you, Sergey. UCCA, the organization in the United States that represent the interests of about 2 million Americans of Ukrainian descent. We carry out comprehensive program of campaign, and we educate people about democracy and economic reforms starting from 1991. And we provide education. We organize delegations of international monitors to monitor elections in parliamentary and presidential local elections in Ukraine. The delegation, UCCA delegation, monitored every election starting 1991, and in 2004, during the historic Orange Revolution, the UCCA delegation consists of 2,408 monitors. Was the biggest monitoring delegation that had ever been registered by CEC. It even was bigger than delegation of OSCE, more than 1,000 people. So this commission had 14 delegates at the local elections, monitors at local elections, and our joint mission, UWC and UCCA mission, we are volunteers, and we monitor these democratic processes now in Ukraine. Starting 1991, each monitor comes to Ukraine at his own expense, using their own funds. So we do not have any government support from US government. Our mission's goal is to support free and fair election process in Ukraine. UWC and UCCA monitors the adherence of OSCE standards concerning free and fair elections that express the will of people and do not support any candidates or political parties or blocs. Because of global pandemics and limitations of travels, a monitoring mission consisted of experts who were in Ukraine at the time. UCCA supports Ukrainian people in their aspiration for free, independent, and democratic Ukraine. We are together with Ukrainian people and support aspirations in continuation of reforms that will provide for further development of Ukrainian economy, democratic institutions, Euro integration, and membership in NATO. We will continue to protect Ukrainian language, identity, and culture. And UCCA thanks its delegation and monitors, and that they and we highly value their work. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you very much, Andrei. Now I would like to go to the next stage, to our main monitors, those who are really here, who really are with us during these hard times, when OSCE rejected recruiting of short-term monitors, because during this time, flights and travel is really difficult and complicated. It is really difficult to gather those devoted people who are ready in these extremely difficult and dangerous conditions, and they really undertook this work, these obligations, to directly monitor the process locally. And we have two chief monitors here, and we are really grateful to them for this work. They dealt with this work successfully, and now I would like to give the floor to Chief Monitor of the mission of UWC, Natalia Nemilevska. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. As a Chief Monitor of UWC mission, I would like to focus on preparatory and organizational aspects of our electoral and of our monitoring mission and our work on the day of voting, and also on the process of vote counting. It is worth mentioning that the work of Chief Monitor consists of several important aspects. First, this is involvement of monitors. Second, their preparation, training for them. And third, this was work of monitors on the day of voting. and the process of vote counting and its monitoring. And lastly, this is work with data submitted by our monitors during monitoring. It is worth noting that UWC mission didn't carry out comprehensive monitoring that is connected with the number of monitors and the geographical coverage. So the results of observation, they have big importance, taking into account that they add the overall results of monitoring of other international missions that carried out monitoring on the local elections in Ukraine. First, organizational issues and preparatory aspects of our mission. Taking into account those challenges concerning limitations concerning travel, we involved experts and representatives of diaspora who were here in Ukraine. In order to carry out preparation and training of monitoring our mission, we carried out training that consisted of two parts: overall information about electoral process and the process of monitoring and reporting. Training was moderated by me as a chief moderator of our mission, and the main positions were brought by Alexandra Nabiryakut from NGO Opora, that is the leader and specializes in monitoring of electoral process, and Rina Domenico, main monitor of UCCA, and he is present here today. From UWC mission, we had 12 official monitors from 6 countries: Canada, United States, Denmark, Switzerland, Great Britain, and France. And monitors of UWC monitored the electoral process in such regions: Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Kiev, Chernigiv oblasts, and in the city of Kiev. Our monitor, who covered Donetsk region on the day of voting, carried out monitoring in Slavyansk city. Communication and coordination were the key components of our work on the day of voting and during vote counting. As a chief monitor that controls the process, we use different instruments and methods in order to provide the constant contact and support to our monitors. And this was a quick response to the requests, consultations concerning the requests. Requests were connected mainly with opportunities to implement the rights at polling stations, establishment of proper communication with other participants of the process, actions connected with the stages of electoral process, answers to questions and explanations about terms and procedures. The main focus of our mission, the monitors of our mission monitored adherence to the order of the procedures that are envisaged by legislation of Ukraine, procedures established by electoral code, laws of Ukraine, and normative and legislative acts of Ukraine, and resolutions of CSC of Ukraine. These procedures were about opening polling stations, voting, vote counting, and also other aspects of electoral process. Also, organizational issues. There was monitoring of adherence to provision of proper conditions for disabled people, to provide them access to polling stations. And also there were guidance provided by the Cabinet of Ministers concerning COVID-19. They are recommended, and UWC mission also monitored whether the regulations concerning prevention of spread of COVID-19 are adhered to. About our monitors, they identified the facts concerning electoral procedures. Our monitors found a number of minor violations. They are not systemic. One of such violations at polling station, for example, non-proper fix of the ballot box with the seals, and also sorting bulletins problems. There was a case in Kiev Oblast concerning this. And the monitor said that such violations were not systemic, they were not massive violations. Vote counting was assessed by the mission as an orderly process, but somewhat delayed process. Despite some flaws that were noted, not all procedures were carried out orderly. About measures concerning coronavirus. In reports, monitors noted such aspects during voting: non-adherence to social distancing. There was a case noted in Sofiyevska, Borshagivka, Kievo-Svetoshinsk region, Kiev Oblast, non-adherence to the size of the premise for voting. This was recorded in Slavyansk city in Donetsk Oblast. Nevertheless, these cases were not systemic. Moreover, monitors noted proper antiseptic means at polling stations and other means for prevention of the spread of COVID-19. About disabled people and their rights, we understand the comprehensive character of this problem. About people with limited capabilities, monitors said that there was some limitation to realization of their rights. There was a case that the booth was not properly arranged, and the person was voting outside this booth. It happened in Dnipro city. So this information was provided by two monitors who worked in Dnipro city. So this is the end of my briefing, and I would like to thank all those who were involved in our work on the eve of elections and on the election day. I would like to thank Vladimir Vistyanik, who was our coordinator from the mission, and also I would like to thank our monitors who, due to their participation, helped us to provide fair and free elections in Ukraine. Thank you. Thank you, Natalia. We thank all monitors who joined the work actively. I would like to remind to you that this is the first round of elections. We see that in many cities, in many towns, there will be a second round of elections. Unfortunately, we cannot relax. It's too early to relax. I believe that this experience will help us to gather forces, and in several weeks, with this new wave, with new forces, with new aspirations, to continue our work in new rounds of elections in different regions of the country. Now I would like to introduce Mr. Rina Domenico, who is a chief monitor from Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. His experience was really valuable. The methods of preparation of monitors, this method was online programs were developed, and these programs allowed to use these technological opportunities on the day of voting, and also helped to make conclusions concerning monitoring. We are thankful for cooperation, and he is going to tell us about his views, about his experience concerning midterm results of these elections.
Very much. I appreciate the opportunity to work with the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America and Andrei and Tamara. I always enjoy the opportunity. I also appreciated the opportunity to work with the Ukrainian World Congress. It's a great pleasure for me. We in UCCA, and in this case with the UWC, we seek to achieve international standards of election monitoring. The most important people in monitoring an election, as has been mentioned many times by several of the speakers here, the most important people are the observers themselves across Ukraine. As Andrei mentioned in his opening remarks, because of COVID, primarily because of COVID, it was very difficult to get people to observe in this election. Consequently, we don't have the thousands of report evidence from experts such as yourselves and people who have been doing the analysis. Nevertheless, as difficult as this circumstance was, we did have over 100 observation data points. That is, 100 over 100 observations were done, including a small number of our overall conclusion that we can elections. Nevertheless, it's very, very difficult to draw very clear conclusions from the small sample of data that we have. And it's a kind of a perilous situation because in a country like Ukraine, where we have had problems in the past of systemic election issues, let's be polite, it's very difficult to be sure that we're not missing something when we do have such a small number of data points. Nevertheless, I have to point out a couple of things that we can draw as pretty clear conclusions. When we met with the Central Election Commission earlier in the month of October, I think we all left a little concerned that they weren't going to be able to address the issues of COVID. My own personal observations, and I did polling stations myself as usual, as well as the conclusions of our monitors, is that there was a significant effort on the part of the Central Election Commission to meet the mitigation requirements of COVID. Now again, we do have instances where this may not have happened. Our data, again a small sample, shows that in over 80% of the cases of the polling stations, the COVID restrictions were posted and the COVID mitigation attempts, that is social distancing, hand sanitizer, and mask wearing, were enforced. To me, this is very encouraging. I think considering what could have happened, to me, it represents a success for the CEC and for the process across Ukraine that this happened. Again, we're drawing conclusions from a relatively small sample, so it's very easy to come up with incidents here and there where we're going to find something went very wrong. But was it systemic? No. I think you have to give the CEC and the Ukrainians a lot of credit for being able to pull that together as well as they did, as well as being willing to listen to the concerns about COVID and being able to implement those mitigations and being willing to push on that point. If they didn't lean forward on that, it would not have happened. We did have a few incidences, as Natalia mentioned, of things that could be considered violations, but none of them are really systemic, so we can't draw any conclusions about that. What we can draw one conclusion is that none of our observers concluded that any polling station was either bad or very bad. And again, as international observers, we use those four categories: good, very good, bad, and very bad. There's a lot of dispute about using those four categories because, to me, it's very difficult to determine what is the difference between a bad and very bad polling station, and what's the difference between a good and very good polling station. But nevertheless, we don't have any incidents in our small data set that point to any polling station being bad, being out of control, not being able to do what they're supposed to do. Again, it's unfortunate that we could not have the number of observers I think we would have had ordinarily. One other subjective conclusion that we can draw from our data, I know it's been very popular in the press to say that the turnout, which was lower than normal, 37%, that it was depressed because of political considerations and so on. As international observers, we don't really look at those issues. Those are for the analysts, and there are guys on who do that. But from the point of international observers, I would take a different point of view. Maybe it's the American attitude of being optimistic at all times. But I saw genuine enthusiasm at the polling stations. I'm actually encouraged by the fact that 37% of the electorate showed up, because, again, we all here in Ukraine know that in general there are not very good COVID controls going on out here in the street. There is not good government enforcement of COVID controls out here in the street. And I thought it would have a much bigger impact on the electorate on the day of election on Sunday. So I have to congratulate the Ukrainian electorate, the population, for coming to the polls in the numbers that they did. I think there are other reasons that can point, that can also have been a factor in holding the vote total down. But nevertheless, COVID was a significant one, but I still think it was an impressive turnout nevertheless.
Thank you very much, Lino. І я би хотів ще, можливо, так, до закінчення не можу не згадати. Тобто ми вже сьогодні...
Thank you so much for your comments. And once again, I would like to thank you to our partners. Both UWC and UCCA had separately registered missions, and our coordinated actions allowed us to negotiate and to communicate with the official authorities as one voice. We are very grateful for cooperation with the Central Election Commission. We are thankful for the cooperation with the Ministry of Internal Affairs, with the National Police, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with the Ministry of Healthcare. We cooperated with Mr. Lashko as soon as we found out that COVID-19 was the big obstacle to our work. We also cooperated with Opora NGO and Voters Committee of Ukraine, with expert organizations. We met with the religious leaders in Ukraine, and we are grateful to the religious leaders who encouraged voters to come to the polling stations to vote sincerely, to vote fairly, and not allowed to give bribes. This only proves that there is much space for further cooperation and for our further work during further elections. And I believe that very soon we will have one more meeting where we will report about our work. As Mr. Brzezniewski mentioned, the philosophy of our approach to elections should be slightly changed. We involve analysts. We get reports from our observers, and we are able to produce recommendations how to make future election process more democratic, better organized for the sake of Ukrainian people. I would like to thank to all the presenters, and now we have some time for Q&A session, and I would like to encourage you to ask questions. I have a question. Whether you did a monitoring of foreign mass media? Yes, this is how we are different from other monitoring missions. Additionally to the monitoring of situation in Ukraine, we monitored the mass media. We observed how mass media behaved before elections. We registered how the owners of TV channels sent messages and how that messages were communicated, broadcast by their channels. We also monitored the situation with Hungarian interference into the elections. We also monitored how mass media all around the world covered Ukrainian elections, and we traced back all I think all the coverage, both positive and negative. The international community never had shown such an interest in local Ukrainian elections as this time. And I think it's our mission to spread the news about elections in Ukraine. TV channel 5, whether you disseminated information about Ukrainian elections in the United States and how this was evaluated. I discussed the elections with the Ukrainian Parliament, with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and expressed our vision that the main mission of our observation or monitoring missions was to follow up the enforcement and implementation of election legislation, and all the opinions or conclusions that we draw from our practical work, we will submit to those people in power. We did this directly during that meetings, and we will include it into our final report. Mr. Brzezniewski is in Zoom and he may add. Boris, the floor is yours. Maybe Boris is unable to hear us. We can hear you, thank you. There were some unexpected things in course of preparation to elections, and such unexpected things complicate the elections, and when we think about that presidential survey that or that survey which was organized by a political party, and that survey only stirred up a lot of concerns and raised a lot of questions. We do not think that that survey influenced at the result of elections, and we are not sure that the results of elections, which soon will be published, that we do not think that that survey complies with the standards of opinion polls or surveys. We believe that this would not become a precedent, and we will comment more on this survey in our report. I'm checking our online comments. What was the most difficult for your monitoring missions this year, and where your report will be published? And the next question. So the biggest difficulty or the biggest challenge to your mission this year? The biggest challenge for us this year was the new election legislation, which changed the rules of the game, which changed the legislation considerably for the voters, for the monitors, and for the candidates. The Parliament has introduced big changes in the legislation at the last moment, and the Central Election Commission had to make tough decision in last moment when the Parliament suspended its work because of the lockdown. And this was the biggest challenge during this year elections, that considerable novelties which were introduced into legislation, into the process, into the procedures after the voting. This was the key challenge for us. The second biggest challenge was pandemic. The second wave of pandemic has been growing, and 40 members of the Central Election Commission fall ill, and one of our monitors fall ill, and we were in a situation when it was rather difficult to substitute those people. For many countries, it has become a problem. Also, the decision about gray zones remained uncertain and insufficiently was backed up with the legislation. Partially, we had seen that people became disillusioned in elections, disillusioned in their political preferences. So these were all the challenges that we experienced during the October elections. And when I mentioned that this was the most complicated elections in Ukraine in its history, I believe that the chairperson of the Central Election Commission was absolutely right in this statement. On our website, there would be a highlight Elections 2020, where you will be able to find our intermediary report and our final report. And Natalia, a question to you. Would you please mention where the volunteers work? Do you mean volunteers or observers? You somehow mentioned our monitors. We had 12 monitors from 6 different countries. And we covered the following territories. It was Donetsk region, Chernigiv region, Dnipro region, and Kyiv. We also had the Lviv region, but unfortunately that monitor who had to go to Lviv region, that's why we were unable to cover the Lviv region as it was planned at the beginning. And the next question, whether any of our monitors registered any violations and whether he or she had brought this to court charges, etc. No, we did not have such cases this year. I would like to add that our monitors came to conclusion that these elections were held in a rather positive, peaceful, and quiet atmosphere. For them, this was rather positive message that they participated in peaceful and positive elections. Volodymyr Bachus-Novos, you mentioned that there were some elections. Could you specify which minor maybe violations were the most peculiar for all regions in Ukraine? I believe that this is a question which you cannot answer within 1 minute that has left for our briefing. I believe this question will be broadly answered in our report. If you wish, you may read our report once again. Dear friends, whether you have further questions, since it looks you don't have further questions, I suggest to finish now, and you may stay and ask individual questions to our participants. Thank you for your participation. Thank you for your questions. We wish a lot of success to you and to Ukraine.